The villa was quiet, wrapped in darkness, except for a single beam of light that faintly came from the kitchen. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had just struck 2, an hour when even the restless usually gave in to sleep. Luke slowly descended the stairs, barefoot, a bathrobe draped over his shoulders. He wasn't used to the silence. In the past, years ago, the house had been filled with laughter, piano music, the rustling of book pages as his wife read by the fireplace. Now there was only silence and routine. Tea at 9, loneliness at 10, insomnia after midnight. He didn't expect anyone else to be awake. When he turned the corner into the kitchen, he stopped. There, bent over the marble island, sat Anna. She wore a loose sweater over her house uniform, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Around her lay thick medical books, a spiral notebook full of handwritten notes, diagrams drawn in ink. She didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in her world of anatomy and chemical equations. Luke cleared his throat. Anna flinched and closed the book in shock. "I am sorry, Mr. Duval," she stammered, jumping to her feet. "I didn't think anyone was awake." He raised his hand. No, it's fine. I just came to get some water." "But what are you doing?" She hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "I was just studying." "At 2 in the morning?" "I have an exam tomorrow," she said quietly. "An entrance test for an online program." Luke furrowed his brow slightly. "I didn't know you were taking courses." "I do it after work," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Only at night. I can't afford college here. But if I pass the test, I could qualify for distance learning. It's just a small chance, but I have to try." He glanced at the nearest textbook. "Advanced Human Biology. You want to become a nurse?" he asked. Anna looked up, and for the first time, he saw it. The fire behind her usually lowered eyes. "A doctor," she said. Luke blinked. "I want to become a doctor," she continued, her voice now steadier. "I've wanted that since I was a child." He studied her for a moment. Not yet 30, petite, polite, efficient. She cleaned the house, folded the laundry, spoke only when spoken to. And yet, here she was, burning the candle at both ends, chasing a dream most would have long given up on. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated. "When I was 10, my father got sick. We didn't have money for proper treatment. He died at home. I remember sitting next to him, feeling completely helpless. I swore to myself I'd never feel that powerless again." Luke didn't reply at first. He just looked at her, truly looked. She wasn't asking for pity. Her voice wasn't broken. Her eyes weren't pleading. She just stood there, quiet and brave, surrounded by the tools of a dream no one had given her. One she was building herself from scraps of time, worn-out books, and sheer determination. "You're tired," he said softly. "Yes," she admitted. "But you're studying anyway." "Yes." He nodded, as if processing a truth he hadn't expected to find in his own kitchen. "Well," he said after a moment, reaching for a glass of water, "don't let me stop you." Anna looked up in surprise. "Go on," he added, gently pointing to the notebook. "You've got a test to pass." Her lips parted slightly, incredulous. Then she nodded slowly, sat down, and reopened her book. As Luke turned to leave, he paused in the doorway and looked back. At this young woman with no time, no help, no guarantees, only willpower. And in that moment, something changed. He no longer saw the housekeeper who cleaned his windows and ironed his shirts. He saw courage. He saw determination. He saw the seed of a future not yet written. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt something stir in his chest, something that had lain dormant since the day he buried his wife. Hope, admiration, perhaps even the gentle, unfamiliar pull of inspiration. In the silence of his own villa, Luke Duval realized that the brightest light didn't come from chandeliers or wealth, but from a small kitchen lamp and the quiet, tireless flame of a dreamer named Anna. Anna's days began before the sun rose and ended long after the world had gone to sleep. By 5 in the morning, she was already awake, preparing breakfast in the quiet kitchen, folding laundry, organizing the pantry before anyone else stirred. By late morning, she swept through the long hallways of the estate, polished glass doors, scrubbed marble floors until they shone like mirrors. She moved with quiet efficiency, never lingered too long, never truly rested. At lunchtime, she served meals she never tasted herself. In the afternoon, she tended to the garden, wiped dust from bookshelves in rooms where she was never invited to sit. And when the house finally settled down for the night, Anna returned to her room, the smallest one, near the laundry, with a creaky bed and a desk made of salvaged wood, and began her second life. Her textbooks were old, bought secondhand through online ads and shipped from Florida. Her notes were scribbled in the margins of scrap paper, receipts, napkins she'd saved from lunch. Her only light source was a weak desk lamp that flickered when the air conditioner kicked in, and yet she studied. She quietly practiced pronouncing complex medical terms, afraid to wake the sleeping house. She watched free lectures on YouTube for hours, pausing and rewinding again and again to understand the terminology. Her internet connection often lagged, but she never complained. She couldn't afford the luxury of frustration. Only at midnight did she take a short break to check her phone. A message from her little sister Mari saying good night, and a photo of their mother, looking thinner each week, a picture of her little brother Ben, showing Anna as a superhero in a white coat. These messages were her screensavers, small reminders of why she did all this. She sent home nearly everything she earned, for medicine, for school fees, for food. She left just enough for instant noodles, toothpaste, and a bus ticket, even though she rarely left the property. She hadn't bought new clothes in years, her shoes had holes, she cut her own hair to save money, but none of that mattered. She had a goal. Her dream of becoming a doctor had nothing to do with fame or prestige. It was about people like her father, who died feverish on a bamboo mat because they couldn't afford treatment. It was about mothers in the countryside who waited too long to give birth because there was no clinic. It was about giving children like Ben a better answer than, "We don't have the money." People told her it was impossible, that no one like her, dark-skinned, penniless, a housekeeper in a foreign country, could ever wear a white coat. But Anna didn't argue. She just worked. Even on the hardest days, when her hands ached from scrubbing or her eyes burned from lack of sleep, she never let the fire inside her die. She carried her dream like a sacred ember in her chest. And Luke noticed. He didn't say anything, not yet, but he saw how she moved, with discipline, how she stole glances at her books when she thought no one was watching. He noticed how she touched everything with care, even the furniture, even the floor, as if the world, despite everything, still deserved gentleness. Anna never asked for more, not for time, not for money, not for recognition. She didn't believe in handouts. She believed in work, and she worked quietly, relentlessly, without apology. One evening, as she sat at her desk comparing symptoms for a mock test, she looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I'll make it. Even if it takes forever, I'll make it." She didn't know if anyone heard, but someone had. And for the first time in his life, Luke felt that true strength might not be loud, not powerful, not adorned with medals. Maybe true strength wore an apron by day, a pencil in its hair by night, and carried the weight of a future no one else believed in. It started with a second glance. At first, Luke had only observed Anna from a distance, casually, with the kind of detached curiosity that people of his status often felt toward those who served them silently. But after that night in the kitchen, something changed. After he had seen her hunched over her medical books, with eyes radiating tired determination, he noticed her more often and more consciously. He saw how gently she trimmed the hydrangeas in the back garden, as if they were living beings with stories. How she wrapped a dish towel around the handle of the hot kettle so the cook wouldn't burn his hand. How she noticed the butler looked pale and, without a word, placed a bowl of warm soup by his door. She spoke little, but in the silence, she conveyed something few in Luke's world ever expressed: mindfulness, kindness, not as a show, but as instinct. He began to ask her casual questions. Small, unobtrusive things. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, Mr. Duval." Before that, "Private households. Always with room and board. It saves money." Her answers were short, respectful. She never lingered, never accepted anything, but she was honest. And it was that honesty, clear, without any facade, that touched him. One evening, as he sat on the terrace drinking black tea, he saw her returning from the market with 2 bags. Instead of dropping them off, she went to the gardener, who was kneeling and tending to a rose bush, and handed him a small box of ointment for his knees. "You said last week they hurt," she said softly, and then disappeared into the kitchen. Luke said nothing, but something stirred in him. The next evening, As he walked down the hallway near the study, he found her again, sitting by the open door to the servants' corridor, reading. She looked up in alarm and tried to stand. "No need," he said. "May I sit with you?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Here. I like the quiet," he said and sat down on the chair opposite her. She blinked, then nodded, wanting to close her book. "No, go ahead," he said. She hesitated briefly, then reopened it. A few minutes passed in silence. Then he asked quietly, "Do you miss Florida?" She paused. "Every day. Why don't you go back?" She didn't look up. "Because everything I need to become is still here." That night, they didn't say much more, but something formed between them. A thread. It became a habit. A few nights later, he brought 2 cups of coffee to the same corridor. "This one is sweet," he said. "I didn't know how you take it." She smiled. "Sweet is good. Thank you." They sat in silence and drank slowly. On another evening, he asked her about her family. She told him about her mother, still recovering from a stroke, and her 2 siblings, both still in school. How she sent them money every week. How she once wanted to be a teacher, until she changed her dream after her father's death. "Lynn died of a lung infection," she said quietly. "There was no doctor in our village. The nearest clinic was 2 hours away. By the time we got there, it was too late." Luke said nothing. His hands gently closed around the warm cup. "My wife," he said after a pause, "used to teach children in town every Saturday, rain or shine." Anna looked at him. "She died of cancer 5 years ago," he added. "Fast, aggressive. 1 month she was still laughing at my bad piano playing. The next she was gone." Anna lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." Luke shook his head. "I've never told anyone in this house that." They sat together for a long time in that quiet atmosphere. No roles, no masks, just 2 people who knew loss, understood endurance, and recognized it in one another. From then on, their evening conversations became a quiet ritual. Sometimes they talked about science, sometimes about memories. On other evenings, they simply sat, drank coffee, and shared a silence that wasn't empty, but filled with mutual understanding. Luke caught himself looking forward to these hours. They weren't loud or dramatic, but in the gentle rhythm of Anna's presence, something inside him began to thaw. He smiled more, laughed at things he'd never noticed before. One day, he found himself humming a melody he hadn't remembered in years. And one evening, when Anna handed him a cup of tea and their fingers touched for the briefest moment, he felt a spark, not necessarily of attraction, but of life. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not a blazing flame, but a quiet, steady glow. And for the first time since he had buried his wife, Luke Duval realized that his heart was capable of more than just memory. It had begun to feel again. Because someone, without ever trying to, had shown him how. It started with a phone call. Luke was sitting in his study one morning. Sunlight fell on the old mahogany wood and stacks of business reports he no longer cared about. He picked up the receiver and dialed a private number known only to a few close colleagues. "Dr. Patel," he said when a voice answered on the other end. "I need a favor." A week later, Anna was called, not to the kitchen, not to the garden, but to the library, a room where Luke rarely received staff. She stepped in nervously, wiping her hands on her blouse. "Sir," he didn't look up from the folder on the desk. "There's a hospital I've worked with for over 10 years. They run an outreach program on Saturdays. I've arranged for you to volunteer there." Her eyes widened. "Volunteer? In a real hospital?" He nodded. "You'll shadow nurses, assist with non-critical tasks, observe, learn. Just a few hours a week." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Think of it as preparation for your future," he added, finally looking at her. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll work hard. I promise." He smiled slightly. "I know you will." On Saturday, Anna arrived at the city hospital. In her simplest clothes, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes full of nervous energy. A nurse named Claudia introduced her to the routines and assigned her to the outpatient department. Anna didn't hesitate. She took blood pressure readings, helped elderly patients with forms they could barely read in English, comforted crying children in the waiting room, and disinfected beds between appointments. She moved with care, but also with purpose, observing, assisting, learning. At the end of the first day, Claudia approached her with a raised eyebrow. "You said this is your first day in a hospital?" Anna nodded, unsure if she had done something wrong. "You have better instincts with patients than some of our interns." Anna blinked. "I just try to help. The way I'd want someone to help my family. Claudia looked at her a moment longer, then nodded. Come back next week, same time. From then on, Anna came early, always ready to learn. She asked questions when appropriate, took notes in her small, worn notebook, and stayed longer than necessary. The staff began to recognize her. Some doctors even asked her opinion during rounds, not to test her, but because she was observant. Luke never asked. He didn't interfere, didn't question. But every Saturday evening, when she returned, he left a cup of warm tea at her door. No words, no note, just silent support. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Luke asked her into the library again. This time, a folder lay on the desk. Anna stepped closer. Did something happen? She asked. He gestured to the chair. No, quite the opposite. She sat down, confused. Luke slid the folder across the table to her. Inside, an acceptance letter from a prestigious health foundation affiliated with his company. Addressed to her. A full scholarship for a 2-year pre-med program, with guaranteed admission to a partner university if she passed. Her hands trembled as she read. I don't understand, she whispered. I didn't apply. You didn't have to, he said. I did. She looked up, stunned. Why are you doing this for me? Luke returned her gaze calmly. Because I see who you're becoming. Tears welled up in her eyes. You work harder than anyone I know. You've taught yourself more than some students with every advantage. And you care, truly. That can't be taught, but it should be nurtured. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to take it all in. You owe me nothing, he continued. This isn't charity. This is belief. You've earned every line in that letter. I only help the world see it. But I'm just. She shook her head. A housekeeper. No, he said softly. You're a future doctor. The world just needs to realize it. That night, Anna didn't study. She sat in her room and stared at the acceptance letter, the seal embossed in gold at the top, her name printed in bold. Her whole life, she had fought for scraps, for minutes to study, for borrowed books, for the smallest fragment of a dream. Now, a door had opened. Not a miracle, but the quiet belief of a man who had seen her, not her position, not her poverty, but her potential. And that was the greatest gift, one she had never dared to ask for. Hope. Real, tangible hope, the kind you could build a future with. Anna held the letter in her hands for days, folded and unfolded it, traced her name with her finger, read every line again and again until she could recite them in her sleep. A full scholarship, a real lecture hall, professors, laboratories, textbooks she wouldn't have to borrow, a future. But behind the golden seal lay a price she couldn't ignore. She sat late at night at her desk, calculator in hand, scribbling numbers on the back of an envelope. The tuition was covered, but not the rent back home, not her mother's medication, not the school fees for Mari and Ben. Every dollar she earned from her job was already accounted for. If she quit to focus on her studies, that lifeline would disappear. She laid her head in her hands. Could she really give up this small but steady income? Could she abandon the people who depended on her, just to chase a dream that still felt like a distant wish? The next morning, Anna asked to speak with Luke. He invited her into the conservatory room, a quiet, sun-filled space surrounded by orchids and ferns. She stood stiffly before him. Anna clutched the acceptance letter tightly in her hands. I don't think I can go, she said softly. Not now. Luke looked up from the tea he was pouring. Why? I send money home every week. My mother's health depends on her medication. My siblings, they're still in school. If I stop working, they have nothing. I can't be that. Selfish. He set the teapot down. Anna, what you call selfish, I call brave. She shook her head. They need me more than the world needs another doctor. He stood slowly, walked over to her, and gently placed his hand on the letter between her fingers. You've given your whole life, and I admire that. But if you give up your dream just to survive, you'll survive forever, and never truly live. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking you to abandon them, he continued. But maybe it's time someone else helped carry the load. Maybe it's time you became the person you were always meant to be. She stared at him, trembling. No one has ever said anything like that to me, she whispered. I mean it. Silence settled between them like fine dust. Then she slowly sat down on the chair across from him. Her fingers relaxed, her shoulders dropped. I'm scared, she said. I know, he replied gently. That's how you know it's worth it. Anna looked through the glass doors at the morning sunlight flooding the garden. She thought of her father, coughing in the dark, of her mother, waiting for medicine, of her sister, drawing pictures of Anna in a white coat, of her brother, with big eyes and all the questions she never had time to answer. And she thought of herself, not who she had been, but who she could become. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it." Luke exhaled, a small smile playing at his lips. Then the world just got a little bit happier. She laughed through her tears, a laugh that came from deep within, half joy, half disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just become the person you already are." That same night, Anna began to pack, not with fear, but with something else, quiet determination. The gentle tingle of finally stepping into a life that had always seemed out of reach. She wasn't leaving her family behind. She was moving forward. For them, and for herself. The first day of the pre-medical program felt like entering another world. Anna stood in front of the campus building, backpack slung over one shoulder, a folder of documents in hand. Around her, students stepped out of luxury cars, wearing designer coats, carrying tablets and noise-canceling headphones. In the cool morning air, their conversations revolved around vacations, private tutors, reserved spots. Anna pulled her sweater tighter around her, feeling the frayed collar like a spotlight on her. She quickly walked through the glass doors, head lowered, clutching her scholarship ID like a shield. In her first anatomy class, she didn't speak, took notes, listened intently, nodded at questions. She didn't laugh when the professor made a joke. She was too focused, too unsure whether she even belonged here. The other students barely noticed her. Some smiled politely, most didn't even ask her name. But Anna observed, learned, reviewed every night, practiced alone with flashcards and online simulations. She was always the first to arrive, the last to leave. Quiet, invisible, but present, relentless. One afternoon, during a group project on a rare immune deficiency, the class hesitated. Anna raised her hand, softly but firmly. "The symptoms fit a variant of Jobs syndrome," she said. "We covered it in last week's immunology reading." The room fell silent. The instructor blinked. "That's correct." From that day on, the whispers began to change. People started asking her questions, not out of condescension, but out of curiosity. Who was she? Where had she learned to think like that? Anna never said much. She just kept coming back. Every day, with precision, humility, and fire. Every month, she wrote to Luke. No emails, letters, handwritten on lined paper, neatly folded. She told him about her classes, exams, small successes. And she thanked him in every single one. She never forgot who had opened the door for her, but she never asked for more. Luke never replied, but he read every letter. And after reading it, he pinned it to the corkboard in his study. Each letter was a quiet testimony to something he hadn't known he needed. A reminder that his once cold, calculated world had produced something good. One evening, his assistant stepped into the study, saw the letters, and asked, "Are those from your niece?" Luke smiled faintly. Something like that. Anna continued to bloom. She achieved top scores on exams, received praise from professors, invitations to research projects. She joined a mentorship program for immigrants, offered tutoring to those just beginning their journey, just like she once had. And slowly, something changed. Not around her, but within her. She walked taller, spoke up more often, looked professors in the eye, stopped apologizing when she spoke. It wasn't arrogance, it was arrival. She had once whispered her dream in the dark. Now she stood in brightly lit lecture halls, speaking about medicine, care, and ethics, with clarity and strength. One afternoon, she saw herself in the mirror of the campus library. Hair neatly tied back, a white coat over her arm, textbooks pressed to her chest. She no longer looked like a housekeeper. She looked like a future doctor. But more than that, like someone who knew she belonged. Luke never spoke about the letters on the wall, but he read them every night, carefully, like a kind of scripture. And in his quiet house, once so full of loss, there was now something new, a soft, steady presence. The knowledge that somewhere out there, Anna was becoming exactly the woman she had always been meant to be. Not because of him, but because someone had finally believed she could. For years later, a car slowly rolled up the familiar gravel driveway. The villa had hardly changed. Ivy still curled around the white columns, the windows gleamed, the garden bloomed peacefully as before. But everything in Anna had changed. She stepped out, adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath. 4 years ago, she had walked this path, with a mop in one hand, a lunchbox in the other. Back then, she studied in secret at night, clinging to a fragile dream. Today, she returned, not as a housekeeper, but as a medical school graduate. As a future doctor. She rang the bell. The door opened slowly. Luke stood there. A little older, his hair grayer, his wrinkles deeper, but the same eyes. Warm. Alert. "Anna," he said softly. She smiled. "Hello, Mr. Duval." "No more, sir," he said with a smirk. "Not today," she replied, laughing gently. He stepped aside. "Come in." They walked into the conservatory. The sun still spilled over the tiled floor. He poured tea, without asking, like before. "I kept all your letters," he said at some point. "They're still on the wall. When the house gets too quiet, I read them again." Her throat tightened. "I never knew if you read them." He smiled. "Every single one. Twice." She told him about her first patient, the long nights of study, the clinic where she would soon begin her residency. "Do you ever regret leaving?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long time, then shook her head. "No, because on the way, I found myself." He nodded slowly, deeply, as if something within him had filled with that truth. On the day of her graduation, Anna stood on stage. The applause was loud, the lights warm. Her white coat now bore her name, Dr. Anna Santos. "I wasn't born into a world of opportunity," she began, "but into a small home where dreams were often too expensive." Silence fell over the hall. "I've seen illnesses take people, not because there was no cure, but because we couldn't afford it. For a long time, I thought my only purpose was to survive. Until one day, someone saw me. Not where I came from, but who I could become." She smiled gently. "That person didn't see a housekeeper, but a story that wanted to be told. And he gave me the most precious gift, belief." The applause lasted minutes. But Anna saw only one person, Luke, in the back row, smiling. Quiet. Proud. Months later, Anna opened her first clinic in Queens. 5 rooms, a small waiting area, a mural painted by local kids. No big donor plaques, but hope in every corner. Vaccines for children, checkups for families without papers, care for all. She named it Project Hewaga, Tagalog for miracle. She knew who paid the rent, who had funded the medical equipment. Luke never replied to her thank you letters, but he remained, quietly, steadfastly. One autumn afternoon, he came to visit. They sat outside on a bench, watching children draw with chalk. No one said anything. Then Anna whispered, "They think the building is magical." "Is it?" Luke asked. "In a way," she replied. "It's built on something stronger than concrete." He looked at her for a long time, took her hand. Just for a moment. No words. Only silence. But in his eyes was everything she needed to know, that he had never stopped believing in her. She rested her head on his shoulder. 2 people who were once strangers, connected by a quiet ember, kindled in a kitchen under dim light. Because some stories don't end in love. Some begin with it, and simply keep growing. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful, real-life inspired stories that touch the heart. Your support helps us keep sharing moments of hope, resilience, and quiet strength. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Every subscriber brings us one step closer to telling the next story that matters.